Ever get the feeling that there's more to the Bible than meets the eye?
More. I'd say there's a whole library we don't often talk about.
Exactly. We think of the Bible as this like set in stone thing, right? But it wasn't always 66 books, neatly packaged.
Oh, not at all. Centuries of debate went into what made the cut. Tons of texts were left on the cutting room floor.
And that's our deep dive today. Those so-called lost books of the Bible. Why didn't they make it in? What secrets do they hold? Buckle up, some of this stuff is wild.
Wild is an understatement, but it's crucial to understand these weren't just random exclusions. Specific criteria emerged over time.
So by looking at what's not in the Bible, we learn even more about the beliefs that shaped it.
Precisely. It's a window into the evolution of early Christianity.
Okay, well, let's jump in. One thing that's always bugged me, Jesus' childhood. The Gospels are pretty silent on those years.
Ah, yes. The mystery of those missing years. But you know, there's a text that tries to fill the gap. The Gospel of Thomas.
This is the one I've heard about, right? Doesn't it paint a somewhat different picture of young Jesus?
Different is putting it mildly. While it shows Jesus performing miracles, it also portrays him as, let's say, less than gentle at times.
Less than gentle. I'm thinking of those stories. The kid who insults Jesus and bam, struck dead.
A rather extreme reaction, wouldn't you say? Though he does seem to regret it, bringing the child back to life afterwards.
Right, so even back then, different views of Jesus existed. The canon really emphasizes his mercy, though.
Absolutely. Mercy, forgiveness. Those are central. But Thomas has other incidents, too. A child pushes Jesus, and he's cursed, turned to stone.
Yikes. It's so jarring compared to the Jesus we're used to. Why weren't these acts reconciled with his later image?
Because the core message of the accepted Gospels is about love and sacrifice. This untamed punitive power in Thomas just didn't fit. It struck many as far-fetched, even heretical.
So, two out there for the early church. Makes sense. Okay, what about the testaments of the 12 Patriarchs? Sounds kind of wise and fatherly.
It is, in a way. Imagine Jacob's sons on their deathbeds, giving last bits of advice. Each one focuses on a specific vice or virtue.
Okay, so like Reuben warns against lust, Simeon against hatred. Makes sense. But I thought this one had prophecies about Jesus too.
You're right, there are passages that seem to foretell a king from Judah, a priestly figure bringing justice. Very Christ-like.
Exactly, so why was it tossed out?
Well, this is where things get really intriguing. Many scholars think those prophecies were later additions by Christians.
Whoa, hold on. You're saying they edited it to make it look like it predicted Jesus?
That's the theory. They saw parallels and, well, maybe wanted to bolster the idea of fulfilled prophecy.
Talk about historical manipulation. No wonder the church was suspicious of its origins.
Precisely. Unclear authorship, potential tampering. That's not the kind of foundation they wanted for the canon.
Gotcha. Reliability was key. Okay, moving on to the Book of Jubilees. The name alone sounds like a big celebration.
It's a retelling of Genesis, but with way more detail. Expanded creation story, more laws, even a whole new calendar system.
A different calendar. Now this I gotta hear. What's so different about it?
According to Jubilees, Moses got the whole history of the world revealed to him, not just the 10 Commandments, but the controversial part is the calendar. It's solar and only 364 days long.
Wait, 364, not 365 and change. That would mess everything up. Holidays, birthdays.
You got it. Jubilees insists this is the true divinely ordained system, and any other is wrong. Talk about shaking things up.
Imagine the chaos it would have caused. No more leap years, Passover on a different date every year.
Right, it would have been a huge upheaval. The church likely saw it as too rigid, too impractical for widespread adoption.
Too radical, basically. Okay, but this whole time I'm thinking, who gets to decide all this? Who's the biblical gatekeeper?
Well, it wasn't one person or even one event. Think of it as a slow burn over centuries. Church councils, influential figures, all weighing in. It wasn't until around the 4th century AD that things solidified.
So a gradual process of consensus building, but what were they looking for specifically?
3 main things. First, authority. Was it written by an apostle, prophet, someone close to the source? This is where something like Thomas stumbles, right? No clear link back to Jesus's inner circle.
Makes sense. You want your core texts to be credible. What else?
Second, doctrine. Did it align with the majority Christian beliefs? No contradictions, no heresy. Again, Thomas with the vengeful Jesus doesn't pass that test either.
So theological consistency was key. And lastly,
popularity. Was it widely used by churches in worship and teaching? If it was already part of the community's life, that was a good sign.
So authority, doctrine, popularity. Those are the filters. And the books we've talked about so far just didn't make the cut.
Exactly. They were either lacking in one area or outright contradicted the emerging consensus.
Okay, now for a figure who's definitely in the Bible, but maybe not as we usually think of her.
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene. We know she was a close disciple, but there's a gospel attributed to her that's pretty different.
The Gospel of Mary Magdalene portrays her not just as a follower, but as Jesus' favorite, entrusted with secret teachings the others didn't get.
Secret teachings. Now that's intriguing. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
For instance, Jesus talks about sin not really existing, but being about acting against your nature. There's also Mary comforting the disciples after the crucifixion, urging them not to despair.
That's a powerful message. So what's the big deal? Why was this gospel rejected?
Well, part of it is the other disciples' reactions. Peter is shown questioning Mary's authority, like, why would Jesus tell her things in private?
Sounds like a bit of jealousy there. Didn't anyone stand up for her?
Matthew does, saying if Jesus found her worthy, who are they to judge? It challenges that traditional church hierarchy, with men at the top.
Right, a different power dynamic altogether. And hasn't there also been talk about a maybe romantic connection between Jesus and Mary?
The text doesn't explicitly say that, but the way it emphasizes her being loved by Jesus has led to speculation. Plus, there's Gnostic influence in this gospel, focusing on inner spiritual knowledge. All of that made it a no-go for the developing church.
Too many questions it raised. Didn't fit the official narrative. Okay, on to something else then. The Books of Maccabees. These are interesting because it depends who you ask whether they're biblical or not.
Absolutely. 1 and 2 Maccabees tell the story of the Jewish rebellion against the Greeks. Catholics include them, Protestants don't. A real dividing line.
So why the split? What's each side's reasoning?
For Catholics, it comes down to the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament used by early Christians. Maccabees was in there. They see it as valuable history leading up to Jesus.
So historical context matters. What's the Protestant view?
They go by the Hebrew Bible, where Maccabees is absent. Luther and the Reformer said, yeah, it's history, but not divinely inspired the same way.
And weren't there theological reasons too?
Oh yeah, Maccabees mentions resurrection of the dead, praying for souls in purgatory, stuff not found elsewhere in the Protestant Bible.
So absent from their main text, 80 doctrinal disagreements.
Got it. Now, what about Psalms that aren't by David? The Psalms of Solomon, right? Those date to around 60 BC. Imagine the Jewish people under Roman rule. Corrupt leaders, oppression. These Psalms capture that feeling.
So, historical snapshot, and an emotional one too. But they also have those messianic bits, right?
Very important ones. It's the first time we see Son of David used for a future savior bringing justice.
Whoa, Son of David, that's huge. How's this Messiah described though?
Righteous king, conquering the wicked, purifying the nation. He'll break the arrogance of the sinner. Pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, I can see why the Romans might not have loved these psalms floating around.
Exactly. Talk about a potential call to rebellion. It's likely they tried to suppress them, which explains their exclusion.
Politically motivated, huh? That adds a whole other dimension. Okay, before we get to the really out there stuff, what about the Ethiopian Bible? That one's got way more books, right?
It does. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has 81 books compared to our usual 66, and it's been that way for centuries.
81. That's a lot of extra reading. What's in there that we're missing?
Well, for one, they include Jubilees, but also other texts considered apocryphal by most. It really makes you think, why did their tradition keep these while others didn't?
A whole other deep dive waiting to happen there. Okay, finally, the one you teased from the start, the Book of Enoch. This is where things get weird, right?
Weird is putting it mildly. Enoch is the most controversial of the bunch, hands down. And get this, the New Testament quotes it in the letter of Jude.
Hold up, the Bible quoting something not in the Bible? How does that work?
It's a real head scratcher, shows the messy relationship between these texts. But the reason Enoch is OUT is its content. We're talking fallen angels, the Watchers, coming to Earth.
Fallen angels. Okay, already sounds kind of mythical. What do they do down here?
They take human wives and father a race of giants called the Nephilim.
Okay, now we're definitely into myth territory.
Yeah.
Giants. What's the big deal with them?
Well, they're voracious, eating everything in sight, eventually turning on each other. And the fallen angels themselves teach humanity forbidden knowledge.
Forbidden? Like what? Secret handshakes.
More like metallurgy, weapons making, the use of fire. Azazel, one of the angels, is blamed for that. Others teach women makeup and enchantments. So basically, they jumpstart technology. A&D mess up our morals.
Blaming the angels for makeup, that's a new one. So God's going to be pretty ticked off at this point, right?
You bet. He imprisons the Watchers and sends the flood to wipe out the Nephilim. Enoch actually links the flood to them, not just human wickedness.
That's a huge GE difference from Genesis. So yeah, I can see why it's considered a bit much. But with the Bible quoting it, why reject it entirely? You mentioned it being pseudepigraphical. What's that mean?
Basically, it claims to be by the ancient Enoch, but was probably written much later by someone else using his name, so questionable authorship right there. Plus, all the angels and giants just didn't fit the tone of the rest.
Too strange, too unverified. Sounds like Enoch deserves its own deep dive someday.
For sure. There's a ton to unpack there. But overall, what this shows us is that the Bible we know is the result of choices. What to include, what to leave out.
Right. These excluded books, they give us a whole different perspective. It's like seeing the deleted scenes from history.
Exactly. They raise questions about how Christianity developed, what beliefs were debated, and how power influenced those choices. It really makes you think, what if some of these books had made it in?
That's a great question to end on. I think the different Jesus and Thomas is the most mind-blowing. It challenges our whole image of him.
Agreed. It reminds us that the Christianity we know is just one outcome of a long, complex process.
So whether it's child Jesus with a temper, or rewritten prophecies, or angels teaching us makeup, these lost books make us wonder, what does it mean to call something sacred? How do those choices shape our beliefs even today? That's something worth pondering long after this deep dive is over.
Without a doubt, the echoes of these lost stories are still with us, whether we realize it or not.